As you can see, we've got a bit of an issue up here in the front of the chassis. We've got a fair amount of rust, particularly in this front cross member, and I know this is a pretty common place for these 40 series to rust out. Now, you can actually buy these second hand off of eBay and online, but they tend to cost you an arm and a leg, 300 to 400 Australian dollar dues. Now, I'm inclined not really to want to pay that because, I don't know, that's a lot of money that I can put elsewhere, like turbos. So what I'm going to do is actually have a proper squiz at what's actually going on here and what steps are required for us to actually patch it all up in a safe manner. Now, chassis repairs aren't a lot of fun, and if you're not too confident with the welder, then it's probably a good idea that you don't touch it at all. And if possible, don't buy that car if you're looking at it if it's got rust in the chassis. It was just so happened that this one was a good enough price for me to warrant it. So what I'm going to start off by doing is cleaning it all up, and that way we can actually have a squiz at what's going on and see the thickness, the real thickness of the metal once the rust has been stripped away. The trouble is with this particular cross member, it's riveted into the chassis here, so to be able to replicate those rivets is really quite difficult if you don't have the right tools, which I don't have. So what I'm going to actually do, the top bit of this cross member is actually in quite good nick. I'm going to chop out the entire cross member, rebuild the bottom section, and then weld it back in, and it'll actually look fairly original, and it will be super strong as well. So we'll get cracking on that. First off, of course, we're going to have to clean it all up and see what we're really working with. So this is of course the front cross member, which was absolutely chewed out. This is actually the piece that I chop skied out of it. Now, what I'm trying to do is replicate what it looked like as much as physically possible. And the way I've done that is by keeping this front section, which is the original part. It wasn't that chewed out, and I filled up a few of the sort of the holes, the rust holes with weld and all that sort of stuff, and I'm fairly happy with the thickness of it. The reason I've kept that is because it's got a lot of, what I call compound bends. So it bends in this direction, then it bends down through there. So you end up with essentially a angle like that, and then another angle that's pointing in sort of another direction. And that's fairly difficult to bend and make and fabricate, etc., etc. So I have put a patch in there, and I'm really happy with the way that welded in. I V'd out the plate as much as possible, and my welds aren't perfect, but they are super strong, and that's really all that matters, because this will all be covered in like a rust protective coating, and all I really care about is whether it is structural or not. So this plate on the back here is to replicate, as you can see there, that would be like that. Now I've kept heaps of extra meat on here so I can shape it down and do whatever. There will be like a nice sort of radius coming up like that, and the chassis rail would be about there. So it's coming along pretty nicely, and it's going to be strong. That's all I really care. So what I've done is made this section slightly too big. And the reason being is that I can then trim it down to fit the chassis dead perfect, because you want your welds to be as strong as physically possible. Now this is going to look pretty schmick once it's all done. That said, it is not probably the nicest looking chassis on the face of the planet, so there's going to be some other work to do up in the front section once we're done with this. But once this is done, it's pretty much home straights for this chassis, and I'm pretty happy with how it's coming out. Well, that pretty well concludes this episode of Full Bore. We're finally making some progress on this BJ40 chassis. And I've got to say, it's coming along fairly nicely. A bit rough around the edges, but of course, you can always smooth them out later down the track. Now, up next on the cards is, of course, to strip this chassis absolutely back to the nth degree, which means, of course, removing the diffs, the leaf springs, all the shockies, all the bracketry, mountings, all that sort of stuff. So it's just a bare chassis, and we're going to take that down to bare metal and of course paint it up with some sort of really protective paint, whether that be 2-pack or an industrial enamel. We'll soon find out. Anyway, we'll catch you when we next meet on a future episode of this channel, which is of course Full Bore. Keep cruising.